The following presentation is a Barrett Sports Media production. Recognizing the unsung heroes of sports media.
I'm stuck in this pit, working for less than slave wages, working on my day off.
This is the Producers Podcast with Brady Farkas.
I'm the executive producer.
Oh, you're the executive producer.
And it starts now.
What's up, everybody? It is a holiday week edition of the Barrett Sports Media Producers Podcast. Today, we check in with Ashton Rotman of ESPN Milwaukee, formerly also of WTMJ in Milwaukee. So we talk about the crossover between WTMJ and ESPN Milwaukee, the growth overall of Good Karma Brands, his previous responsibilities at WTMJ, how he got into business, and so much more. And do you just talk about Aaron Rodgers all the time? Is that the only thing you need to do with ESPN Milwaukee? Ashton gives us all those answers and much more. Ashton, Good Karma has a really interesting setup, right? There's several stations that have a sports component, and they're all kind of interrelated when we talk about ESPN Milwaukee and WTMJ and ESPN in Madison. So talk to me a little bit about your exact place in that intersection.
Sure. So I work for ESPN Milwaukee. That's my main role. I'm the executive producer of programming, as well as the executive producer for Jen, Gabe, and Chewy, the morning drive show. I'm the production director. So I like to have my hands in a lot of things when it comes to ESPN Milwaukee, ESPN Madison as well a little bit, but that's usually their own thing. But anything as relates to ESPN Milwaukee, I try to have my hand as much as I can in anything that's related to it.
Now, as I understand it, there's been a lot of growth with ESPN Milwaukee and Good Karma in general over the last couple of years. Talk to me a little bit about that growth and how you've been a part of it.
I mean, I think one of the big things is, the acquisitions of ESPN LA, ESPN New York, ESPN Chicago a few years ago, that's become a giant as well. So I think that the thing that I've done as part of that is almost nothing. There's one of the great things is that they haven't had to rely so much on other people within the company. It's, hey, we have the structure in place here at Good Karma, so let's bring our structure to other markets where we think it can thrive and become successful. And I think that's started to show is that, ESPN New York has a new lineup. ESPN LA is revamping so many things. ESPN Chicago is doing well. So I think one of the great things is that you don't have to rely on the other producers or other hosts. It's, if they need a hand, if you need something here and there, it's, we can all work together as a team to do it. But as far as that, I mean, that's everyone does their own thing and then just kind of makes a team effort when needed elsewhere. If it does come to, hey, how do you guys run it this way? Or, why does this show work versus why does this show not work when it comes to elements wise or just how it sounds? It's more or less just picking each other's brains, which is kind of a fun asset.
One of the things that's cool to me is that as Good Karma has gotten bigger, they haven't forgotten their smaller market. And look, Milwaukee's a big market. It's just smaller than the other markets that you mentioned. But Good Karma hasn't abandoned that market. Really, they've just continued to put resources into it. So that's got to be it doesn't always go that way.
No, and it's great to see the fact that there is such growth within our own ESPN Wisconsin, ESPN Milwaukee specifically team. And kind of speaking to that, like there are a lot of days where you would look around and see these things going on, like, other stations or other bigger companies are doing this, that, or the other thing that's in a negative way. And here we are, we're bringing more people on board. We're trying new things. And that's one of the great things about us here in Milwaukee is it is almost a hub for the building that we're in now. Downtown Milwaukee is the hub for Good Karma. So like we kind of have the best access to try different things. And we have the best access to founder and CEO Craig Karmazin to talk about things. And he's very accessible regardless, no matter what market it is. It's just nice to be able to walk to his office and talk to him if we really needed to. But we're all such a good, close-knit group when it comes to kind of the, so to speak, front office that we allow each other to try different things and we trust each other to just go ahead and do different things and grow ourselves and not just have to be like, hey, we're doing this now because we have a different market.
Now, I could be wrong, so correct me if I am, but a little internet sleuthing before we talked showed me that you were doing some work with TMJ beforehand. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah, so I've been in Milwaukee for, I just had my 8-year anniversary in October. So I was with TMJ for 4 years before Good Karma Brands came in and bought WTMJ. So then once we became a giant team, they revamped the station on WAUK, became WKTI, and became an FM signal, and then that's when I joined the ESPN Milwaukee team. But I was with TMJ for 4 years. I'm still very close to everyone there, and I still kind of have a hand in some of it, but not a lot, more of a behind-the-scenes thing. But I was doing all sorts of sports stuff there as well. I was the main sports producer of of the Greg Matzik show at night, as well as Packers Radio Network broadcast, Bucks Radio Network, Brewers Radio Network, all that I had my hand in. And that kind of was the first initial into, hey, this is how networks are run. These are how things should operate. And here's how sports radio stations can work. And then finally you go to a sports radio station, you're like, oh, now I can piece it together.
I think this is episode 25 or 26, but the very first episode we had was with Ben Charleston of WEEI, who is the executive producer of the Red Sox radio network. And he's the guy who, sends the tones and plays the spots for 200 Red Sox affiliates. That was you, but
that was me for the Packers. And then sometimes for the Bucks, sometimes for the Brewers, it was all related to that. It was all different, but for Packers for, 6 seasons. That was me behind the board, kind of executive producing, not quite executive producing, but doing just about everything as far as running the game broadcast. That was all me backstage.
What was it like to be at TMJ? Because that's such a news-heavy station. So what's it like to kind of be maybe not out on an island? You're not the only sports guy, but you are the main sports guy in a world full of news people. It
was interesting. I remember I took the job because, when you're young and I was 19 at the time, it was, hey, just whatever the first job is that has the word sports in it, I'm all in on that. Great. Sounds good. I get to move to Milwaukee. I'm from suburban Illinois. It's literally 45 minutes from my hometown to where the station was. I was like, great, I'm in. I don't have to move that far. And I get to be in a really cool market with a budding thing. That was, right when Giannis had just been drafted, when the Packers were still Super Bowl contenders. And then obviously that's gone kind of up and down, and we know how this season's going. But the Brewers had just started to hit Greg Counsell stuff. It was just this great time. This is 2014, this great time where it's things are just about to pop. So I couldn't turn it down, and I got to see also there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of news stuff. 2014, obviously 2016 election. I got to learn all this stuff on the fly and kind of see how a big radio station is run and how a highly regarded radio station is run. I mean, the saying used to be the biggest stick in the state for WTMJ, and that's not a joke. People come to WTMJ for a reason. And it was great to be able to learn that and kind of learn how the station operates and to be able to grow and have opportunities there first where I didn't have to focus just on how sports worked.
I made this joke to the crew from Kansas City last week when I asked them, you got to have a pretty easy job as a producer, right? Just insert Mahomes article here for you. Easiest job in the world. Insert Aaron Rodgers content here, and then we go. Is that what it's like?
I mean, I'd say yes and no, because when it comes to us and kind of the show in the morning, Jen, Gabe, and Chewy, for anyone that doesn't know, how do I describe it? It's Packers and it's nonsense, and it's a lot more nonsense than anything. Look, we've got a Packers Hall of Famer on our show, and we've got Gabe Neitzel, who used to do Packers Radio Network and now does the Packers postgame stuff that we do on ESPN Wisconsin. We have people that are, and Jen Latta, who of course is one of the stars of College Game Day. So when it comes to college football, these are people that I get to work with. It's pretty easy for me to be like, hey guys, what do you think about this today? Insert X Packers topic in here, knowing full well that what's probably going to happen is the thing that happens on a show. I'm not going to say this definitely happened today or anything, but let's say Chewy just out of nowhere says Christmas isn't the top 5 holiday. And then we spend a lot of time arguing about that. That's kind of how the show works. Is I like to view myself as almost a director of of a ship, let's say, or a train, a conductor, whatever, where in the sense that I'm not driving anything, but if they go off the tracks, they're making a decision to put them back on the tracks to where we're doing something, or to push them further off the tracks to where it's just going to be a hilarious next however many segments we go through. So it is working with them has made it so much easier when it comes to doing a show specific. But when it comes to the station, you say Packers, you figure it out from there.
Given that the Packers are struggling this year, does it make it easier to diverge into some of that nonsense because there's not as many, we're not looking at playoff scenario type stuff? Or do you have to be more on track because they are not very good and there's more people trying to figure out what happened and to decode what happens next, et cetera?
That's a really good question. I honestly think them being bad gives us more content Packers wise because of what you just said, the idea that okay, how did we get here? That's kind of how do we get here? How has no coach been fired yet? Or, how can it get worse every week? And somehow it does when it comes to the run defense, for example. That's the easy part there. Are we going to wade further into nonsense on days where this team is terrible? I don't want to talk about them. Yes, it does allow us more of that leeway and that freedom to just kind of talk about what we want to talk about and what fans are engaging most with. And it could be a top 5 holiday list. It just comes out of nowhere, something about a song that was played, something on Twitter that's trending. It's an easier thing to do. Be like, do we really need to talk about Packers this very second? It does become easier when they're bad, but the content is just as fun when they're bad as when they're good.
I don't, pardon my geography, but I don't know exactly how far Madison is from Milwaukee, but even though Wisconsin is in the heart of Big Ten country. I've never really thought of Milwaukee as like college centric. So I'm curious, like how much college talk are you doing in Milwaukee?
I'd say like it does depend. It's pretty story dependent. So obviously the Badgers, just made this huge hire of Luke Fickell, and they had an in-season coach firing, which doesn't happen to Wisconsin, and hadn't obviously for their football program for a long time. So when stuff breaks and it needs to be talked about, I think our show specifically, that's when we talk about it. And Jen being one of the more premier voices in the entire country when it comes to college football and not having knowledge of that, that certainly helps when it comes to a greater college football discussions. We're able to talk about things different ways, but unless it's a prevalent conversation, we're not really diving too much into Badgers talk or even Marquette basketball, which we are the home of Marquette basketball. Like we're not diving too much into it unless it's prevalent. And that's our show mainly in the morning. And then other shows kind of find their different ways. We have Ben Brust, a former Badgers basketball player, and in the afternoon, and his co-host Greg Scalzo went to UW as well. So like they obviously have a bigger connection to Wisconsin itself and bigger passions for it than we do. So I think we all kind of find our own lanes when it comes to that stuff. So like we know our show is, if we're going to talk college football, we're going to talk maybe on a grander scale about, Heisman voting or about the playoff. And then if Badgers news breaks, we'll talk about that. Whereas other shows might have a more deeper passion for it. And that's one of the great things. We kind of allow everyone to stay in their lane when it comes to specific stuff.
The guys in St. Louis told me if they ever had a slow day, they could talk about the Cardinals bullpen for 4 hours and be totally covered. What's the place of baseball in Milwaukee?
That's a good point. I think we probably could talk about that stuff. But that again goes back to what I just said about the lanes. Like we know in the morning, Gabe Neitzel and myself might be watching every single pitch of every single Brewers game or any other baseball games because we love baseball so much. Whereas Jen might be watching, 90% of the games, and Chewy is just watching whatever he wants to watch. So like, if the Brewers are bad, the Brewers are good. Unless they're in the playoffs, we're pretty much only going to talk about something when something happens. Like David Stern stepping down, that was a big deal. So we talked about that. When Josh Hader got traded, that's a huge deal. Like when it comes to non-Packer stuff, our show in the morning does really stick to the newsworthy notes. When it comes to non-Packers teams in the state. Obviously, when the Bucs made their finals run, we talked about the Bucs every day for, 5 months probably, most of every show. So it really is dependent on how the teams are doing, whereas, again, other shows might say, hey, we're more invested in how the Brewers are doing or why the front office is doing these odd things until the William Contreras trade. That's not a personal bias or opinion at all, of course. And we could talk about it or some of the things, but we don't find that that's the in the morning show anyways, that's our lane to where we're going to be the best equipped to serve everyone.
My go-to end question for every producer: what is your advice to new or young producers?
Say yes to everything and try anything. And that comes to saying yes to weird shifts. That's saying yes to opportunities. That's when I say try anything, like production-wise. That's how I got my start in doing production. Is a former program director said, hey, I want you to try doing this. And I didn't think I wanted to do behind-the-scenes production. And now it's the thing that I love doing most, I think, is the creativity that goes into it. So try anything and say yes to everything.
Another day, another great edition of the Barrett Sports Media Producers Podcast. Ashton was awesome. And hey, the Packers won the other day, so I'm sure there's a lot of great content coming on ESPN Milwaukee through the rest of the holiday because of it. So good stuff there from Ashton. Hope you all have a great holiday break. We'll be back in a couple of weeks on the Barrett Sports Media Producers Podcast.
You don't want to believe it, but maybe the show is over.
Thank you for listening to the Producers Podcast. To enjoy past and future episodes, check out iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, the iHeart app, and BarrettSportsMedia.com.